What's going on? This is the OG Kickoff. Subscribe to the OG Kickoff on YouTube. I'm Conor O'Gara. Will, March Madness is here. March Madness is just spring football getting going, and it's chaos. And we're talking about randomly selected clips that teams tweet out for specific reasons, and we're left to sit here and decipher what all of it is. That's what I refer to for March Madness. Like, that's nothing else, right?
Look, if you're an LSU fan, March Madness is women's basketball, and it's spring football. It's actually not even baseball anymore. It's no longer baseball season. That's canceled. So it's really just hopium and supporting the women.
March Madness for an Indiana grad is actually just still being hung over from a national championship, not watching basketball, and instead realizing that Indiana is one of the way too early favorites to win another national championship in football. The sport with the different shaped ball, not basketball, that sport. These are weird times. So that is March Madness, in my opinion. No, I do love March Madness. I love March Madness so much. It might be my single favorite week of the year. And when we record on Thursday, when we record our It Just Meant More, I will do my best to stay off of my phone. I promise. You have my word that I will do my best. Will I succeed? I don't know. It is March Madness for a reason, obviously. And if you're getting me distracted while recording a podcast, your event is probably pretty good. I think that checks that box.
Yeah, I got my boys coming up next weekend, and it was so funny because we got that group chat, that everybody, every trip has, and like they were kind of, we got some Miami fans, we got some UCF folks, and they're like, "Oh yeah, everybody here but Will has a team in this, so it's really exciting this year." And I'm like, "You're so right. I get to host. It's in Atlanta. I don't have to sweat it out for my team." So yeah, it's going to be really exciting, just like watching some really random games with my boys locked in. We've talked about that before, about watching your buddies' teams with your buddies, and how like you want to give them crap, but you want to also kind of be nice because you don't really care about, like, it's not like they're playing your team. So yeah, it's going to be a really, really fun time in Atlanta.
Your friends do that for you more than I think any other group of friends I've ever seen. I really think that my buddies are not. I take that back. At least I haven't been in the same place with them where they're actively rooting with me. Like, they're just going to adopt my team. I don't know. Maybe it's just, it all depends on kind of what your background is. But I guess the only version of that I've ever experienced was this past January, of course, in which my buddies would text me and they were, rooting for IU, because they weren't going to root for Oregon or Ohio State or something like that. So or Miami. So that made sense. But don't take that for granted, man. It's a beautiful thing. It really is.
Yeah. And I think part of that, honestly, is I was lucky enough to have friends who don't really have rival teams to mind almost at all.
That's huge.
So it's like, why do I care if UCF is good? Well, why do I care if Miami is good? I don't. So that's kind of the best part, is have some friends with some AFC teams, if you have an NFC team type thing, where it's like, we see each other at the family reunion. We don't really have beef,
Yeah. Yes. I totally get that. We have a great pod coming up today. We have Shane Beamer coming up in a bit. Talk about this past season, the disappointments, what he's going to try and do to be able to turn around things for South Carolina, the recruitment of Kendal Briles, being able to keep LaNorris Sellers. We dig into all of it. So stay tuned for that. And then I'm sure we're going to have probably some sort of basketball discussion in Lad of the Week. My Lad of the Week is hoops related, spoiler alert. So we'll probably circle back to that in a bit. But we have a lot of spring football to discuss. And I say that a bit tongue in cheek because we're doing SEC spring questions I wish we could answer. These are the things that if we had a crystal ball, probably could find out the answer to, just not by the end of April. And that's okay. That's okay, because they are constant topics of discussion, and they are things that will keep us coming back, and things that we will probably lean one way or another on. So look, I am happy that spring football is back. I'm not going to be one of those people that's like, spring football is nothing and it doesn't do anything for me now that, the spring has changed once again. I am also happy that we are facing somewhat unanswerable questions. And that's not to say that these things won't be discussed ad nauseum. They will. We will definitely repeat ourselves with some of these things. But we are at a place now that I think people want answers to very specific things related to their teams. And I think all of these questions that we will present today, we will not know the answer to until at least late August, and maybe even mid-season with some of these. Like, for example, last year, we wanted to know if the Jackson Arnold experiment was going to work at Auburn. And we got hints from the Auburn side early on. He needs to be able to rebuild his confidence. That's a weird thing to hear coming out of camp. But then you see the way that he played against Baylor and even some of the throws that he made against Oklahoma. And you're like, hey, I don't think that this is destined for failure necessarily. And it wasn't until probably about the mid-season point that we realized this is only a 1 year. This is going to be a 1 year experiment, and those confidence issues in camp were indeed a red flag. So like there's stuff like that, and we didn't really know the answer to the question about the Tennessee offense because, quite frankly, we had more questions about the Tennessee offense coming out of spring than we had going into spring. And I would argue that even at the midway point of the season, when they had the number one offense in college football, we're still going, hey, this is pretty good. How good can it be? And we find out that it's a good but not great offense. So these are questions that maybe it's unsatisfying to listen to us hear these questions asked but not answered. But these are the types of things that we need to be mindful of as spring ball opens up, even though we will not get the satisfying ending to them.
I love that framing, right? Because so much of college football is retroactive. And I love some of the stuff from It Just Meant More, where we got to put ourselves where we were, right? And you talked about like the Jackson Arnold example, I think is a great one where it goes, okay, well, we thought we had these questions asked until really the bullets started flying into SEC play once the tape got out, once, teams were able to adjust. And so I'll say it like this. I think that spring can't make your season, but it can break your season. If you see something coming out of spring that is a massive glaring negative, like a good example of that was the offensive coordinator situation at Auburn, where you start to tell yourself, hey, with Jackson Arnold, you should tell yourself, hey, if this was a top 10 offense in America, how would these three gentlemen be running it? Would they all be up for the Burroughs Award? And so I think that's really what spring is about, is eliminating what can derail your season more so than, taking out the hopium of everybody looking good.
I think we got to call it these moments when we see them. Like, you're cooked. We just saw something happen to you in spring that we will never be able to forget, and you are dead in the water. Don't even show up this fall. Like, come on. I don't care that the playoff expanded. You had no chance whatsoever.
Coach is running cover 3 for the whole spring game. What is this quarterback? What does he not trust about this quarterback? He's got 300 yards and he's sitting down, but the DBs are doing the same thing on every play. What's wrong?
Bama just isn't using running backs anymore. It's just all empty back sets. And we're told, hey, they just kind of want to see what the offense looks like without the running backs and just kind of get the quarterbacks a little bit more comfortable being on an island. These new guys are trying to get them experience. No, that in reality, that's just Alabama doesn't trust any of these guys to be back there in pass protection. So what's the point in having them back there to begin with? If we hear things like that, it is our duty to call them out and tell you this team is cooked.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's start with this question, Will. Who will win each of these quarterback battles? We have quarterback battles. Yeah, 5 of them by my count, give or take. 5 of them that are at least full-fledged quarterback battles in spring camp. We have Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Tennessee, and Vandy. Maybe by the end of spring, we're going to have a good idea who is going to win those battles. But I do think that the change of having no more spring portal window has given us at least a chance to have these quarterback battles, to have them play out in the way that you would traditionally see, albeit with some different context. It could also mean that coaches aren't necessarily afraid to tip their hands, knowing that you're not going to pull a 2018 Joe Burrow. And since I'm losing this battle to Dwayne Haskins, let me hit the portal and enter a situation that I could start immediately, like he found at LSU at that 2018 season.
Wait, Connor, do you think that the removal of that window has saved the spring game?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. Yes, there's no doubt about it. And look, if you give coaches a reason to fear that a single secret can be exposed or a single player can be exposed, we've seen they will take it. And I think that there was a whole lot of fear with spring ball of having these showcases that you could just watch these guys on any sort of ESPN provider that you have and say, oh, that guy that's third on the depth chart right now at receiver, he could help us immediately. Let's go out and get him. I think that there was absolutely that sense that played out. And I was frustrated by it because I didn't like necessarily people saying spring ball was officially dead. But then last year, look, by the time that we got to the end of spring, we're like, none of these games are on TV anymore. And we're not even going to sit here and have full-fledged breakdowns of these games because what's the point?
They're all Jefferson Pilot. We're like, wait, I got to get my rabbit ears out.
Yeah, so that is I think, an intended consequence of that. And I do think that we will get to see more of that. And let's overreact to some stuff. Let's do it, because like that's really what all of this is for. So we will see these battles play out. We do, I think, have 5 of these that are at least obvious enough to us to call them out. Maybe you would argue that there's another that should be part of this conversation, but for now, those are the 5 that I'm going with. And I think Alabama, Arkansas, and Florida, they all have this very specific trend of having one guy that is part of this battle that follow the coaching staff from another school. And you could say offensive coordinator, play caller, however you want to, phrase it. But you have Austin Mack at Bama, who obviously started his career off at Washington, AJ Hill at Arkansas, and then Aaron Philo at Florida. All of these guys can say, oh, I was with my play caller before I got here. And that's a nice leg up to be able to have in a quarterback battle. Does it matter? Is it the deciding factor? I don't know. Or is it just the security of knowing that if what hits the fan, these coordinators, these head coaches all have at least one guy in their back pocket that they can turn to and say, hey, go save us a game. Go save us a game. You don't necessarily have to be the guy that we build everything around, but make sure this thing doesn't fall apart. And that's, maybe that'll play out as well. We don't know in those specific instances yet that there is one definitive favorite. We can all have our hunches. We can all have our predictions, but we need to kind of see all that stuff play out. So, I think those situations are different because Austin Mack is entering year 3 at Bama, year 4 of college. And I tweeted this out earlier. He is not going to be 20 years old until June. Okay. So we are going to have Austin Mack and Keelan Russell, who redshirted last year, men's health cover, 5-star, you remember. They are both going to be 19 years old at the same time for roughly 6 weeks. That's crazy to me. That is absolutely crazy that Austin Mack is still that young. I feel like I bring that up whenever I talk about him, about how young he still is because he reclassified when he was in high school. But that is hilarious to me.
This is our Jason Tatum. He's still 19 somehow. It doesn't make it's like, hey, did you know?
Dude, that guy's he's not even gonna be 21 by the time the robots get here. Just forever a teenager. Forever. Oh, just crazy to see that. But like I thought last year Bama didn't hide that Ty Simpson was the leader in the clubhouse. You saw Ryan Grubb, you saw Kalen DeBoer kind of tip their hand with that. And even though they didn't outright name him the guy until fall camp, you still kind of got a sense, look, he's the leader of the pack. And essentially it's his job to lose at this point. And perhaps with those guys specifically, a spring game is going to be really telling. And maybe Austin Mack will be a lot further along than Keelan Russell. I would not necessarily predict that. I am on record saying I think Keelan Russell wins the starting job. I think he beats out a guy that's 2 years his senior, and I think he gets to be able to kind of be that guy in that offense the way that they'd like it to operate, but we'll see. So there's also the AJ Hill situation at Arkansas, where he comes over with a staff that recruited him and played him as a 4-star true freshman at Memphis. And again, like it's Memphis. They don't get a ton of these 4-stars that are coming in. And so he's very quickly going to be considered a guy that coaching staff looks at and goes, look, we got to get him in early. We got to see what we have in him. Otherwise, he can go elsewhere. We just got to figure out what his skill set is. He's going to be playing sooner rather than later. KJ Jackson for Arkansas had some moments last year filling in for Taylor Green at times, mainly that Texas game. And there were, I think, enough plays that he made that made you think, I'd like to see some more of this. I really would. Kind of similar to like what Cutter Boley did at Texas, in 2024 when, it's late season, kind of like making some plays in a game that just kind of gets away from the defenses. But, make of that what you will. Once upon a time, a quarterback named KJ elevated the floor at Arkansas. Not the last KJ Jefferson reference, probably, when we talk about Arkansas in the quarterback room. I think this is perhaps the closest to a true quarterback battle that we have in the SEC. Maybe. As in, I think you're going to get a lot of the same cliche things from Ryan Silverfield and the new OC, Tim Cramsey, who came over from Memphis with him. I think that Arkansas is going to play that up. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, when you're as bad as Arkansas was last year, and you can tell me they were close, and I get it, but when you're a 2-win team, it's okay to let these position battles play out the way that they will. Pretty pivotal year 1 decision for Ryan Silverfield in a sense, because I don't think that this this winner all of a sudden is like entrenched as the starter, but you're trying to establish an offensive identity in a conference that you have not necessarily been a part of. So that's going to be a battle that's really worth watching. And then the Florida situation.
Hold on really quick. I will say about Arkansas, they're a fascinating case. And it reminds me a bit of Derek Mason's Vandy teams, where it goes, how bad could a team be when they solve like the hardest question to answer that every SEC team says, if I could have one wish, it would be to have like a starting quarterback that can move the football. That's what's so fascinating to me about Arkansas is like, well, you did what you did last year. Your record is what it was. It couldn't get worse. Well, offensively, it technically could. That's what's so fascinating about them is that, the quarterback position, the running back position, you saw what Washington was able to do at the combine. So it's an Arkansas fan base that while they are frustrated with the losses, they have been seeing pretty good offense over the last couple of years with Taylor Green.
It's a good point. They're not really desperate to fix the quarterback position. It's not probably the number one thing. I think that's an important thing, and maybe that allows them a little bit more leniency to kind of play the long game. Or you could flip the other way and say they're not going to have that tolerance. And if you're not making big time plays in the way that Taylor Green was, and the way that KJ Jefferson did a lot throughout his career, you're not necessarily going to be, given the benefit of the doubt from that fan base, who has, I think, earned at least somewhat of a right to have a higher standard of play at the quarterback position. So that's a good point. Florida will. I think this is really intriguing. As much as I think Aaron Philo is going to be the guy after he comes over from Georgia Tech with Buster Faulkner, I do think we need to remember this. DJ Lagway had this meeting, whatever you want to call it, with John Summerall that apparently didn't go well, and it led to him hitting the portal, and he ends up at Baylor. We know that. I bring that up because Tramel Jones Jr., if he had a similar sense that Lagway did, leaving whatever sort of meeting was had, and I don't want to assume that every single person that was retained on that roster had a meeting that went well with this new coaching staff, but I assume that at quarterback, a very important position that you'd like to get figured out, you probably sat down with that guy. If that meeting went poorly, I don't think he's at Florida. So on some level, there was eye to eye the way that they see offensive football. And maybe you could say like, all right, well, Lagway had more of a sense of urgency to kind of get those assurances than maybe Tramel Jones did. Maybe that's fine. What I don't think happened is this. I don't think that those coaches sat down with both Lagway and Jones and challenged them to be most like Haynes King. We need to, like, whatever sort of image we have of that offense, I almost think we need to rule it out in some ways because of how unique of a player Haynes King was.
And also, no coach can ask their quarterback to be like Haynes King because it would violate the Geneva Conventions and the NCAA guidelines. Like, to do the things that he did, sleeping in the locker room, taking the hits that he did. If it's on record that a coach is asking for that, you're probably sanctioned.
That's a good point. Today's age of NIL, no way that's getting written into the contract. Nuh-uh. Look, I think he wants to, if you're Buster Faulkner, you want to operate your offense in a different sort of way. And that's part of the reason why Aaron Philo was recruited to Georgia Tech in the first place. And I think that if you look at that offense, you would say what they did well was they maximized their abilities with the personnel that they had. My unanswerable question is not which one of these quarterbacks will look most like Haynes King. Neither of them are proven runners at all. And Jones especially didn't do that in high school. He had a leg injury his senior year, probably limited a key year of development if he was going to really grow that part of his game. And he hasn't had many reps at the college level. Like, he only played in 2 games last year, which is kind of easy to forget with how often it seemed like his name was brought up. My unanswerable question is instead, who can check the most boxes for Buster Faulkner in year 1? Because that's going to be the guy that's going to win this job. So Philo, as much as he's going to kind of be considered the leg up, because if you're coming with a coordinator and it's the move that everybody expected once Faulkner came on board, he does have a job to win. And I don't think it's just going to be handed to him from that sense. And I think Tramel Jones is going into this feeling like, all right, I have a real opportunity ahead. And even if I don't win this job, there's no guarantee that Aaron Philo locks it down and he's going to be the guy in perpetuity.
Yes, and I'll make one more note about the Haynes King thing. I would argue that if you look at both of what these coaches, right, if you look at Summerall and if you look at Buster Faulkner, what do they look for in a quarterback? Well, it's a guy that moves the pile. It's a guy that can kind of get you the yards on every play and not be looking at 3rd and long. but it ultimately is a guy that doesn't take a lot of risks that are outside of the framework of the playbook. Now, Haynes King was a little different there because he was this veteran quarterback. I think he took a lot of risks that kind of had some head scratchers there. So I would say we're looking a little bit more for a guy who, when the bullet starts flying, he's more calm under pressure, and he's going to run the play sheet, especially with all the guys coming in and out, versus a guy like Philo is very different. He has like this arm strength that people fall in love with. And so again, like the GT comps just don't really work in any capacity because they're not looking for Haynes King for a bunch of reasons. And then Philo isn't anything like him from what I've seen. So I would argue that you have to see those live reps to see when the bullets really start flying, who's going to take the bad risk that I think both coaches don't want.
I think with Philo too, you almost have to remind him that your arm can't overcome everything. I think that's going to be a challenge for him of when the bullets start flying, you think you can make this throw. And I don't know that's necessarily something that's been worked out of his game just yet. And maybe it's going to take year one at Florida for him to be able to kind of figure out what exactly that looks like. But I do think it's a legitimate battle. I think Philo wins the battle, but I don't think it's necessarily locked in of, oh my God, he's destined for X, Y, and Z. I think he has a wide range of outcomes, but Buster Faulkner is very highly regarded in coaching circles and the things that he's going to be able to bring to that offense. And then Tennessee and Vandy will. The unanswerable question is what each of them are going to get from their very decorated 5-star early enrollee quarterbacks in 2026. What a wild thing to say out loud. Vanderbilt, 5-star quarterback entering, could be the starter from the jump. Jared Curtis, and then at Tennessee, Faison Brandon. The Vandy battle is pretty fascinating because everyone heard about Jared Curtis being the heir apparent to Diego Pavia starting from the jump, and we kind of all connected those dots to say, is he going to Vandy if he's not guaranteed the starting job? Let's be honest. Like, that's still the thing that Vandy is trying to overcome, at least in the recruiting world, where, yes, you can have the success on the field, you can do historic things in the way that they did these last 2 years, but you're still looked at through a certain lens when it comes to recruiting at the high school level. And it helps that this guy's from Nashville. And that's probably bodes well. Many a star quarterback have gone through the Nashville pipeline and not even looked in the direction of Vandy. So I don't want to necessarily say that that's just, the only thing that we should be considering here. But it is interesting that Blaze Berlowitz, just a great name. I love a first name of Blaze. Blaze? Come on. He was part of that migration from New Mexico State to Vandy, along with Diego Pavia, along with Tim Beck. Are we 100% positive, bet your life on it, that Curtis, as a true freshman, is going to beat him out from the jump? I'd say I'd probably bet Curtis is going to win that job, but you also have a head coach who's definitely not going to tip his hand. I don't think that you're going to see Tim Beck speaking a whole lot about these guys in the offseason. I don't think he's going to tip his hand. And let's also remember that Clark Lee literally had the best quarterback in program history in Diego Pavia. And before he started a game at Vandy, post New Mexico State transfer, Vandy was the last team that season to announce a starting quarterback. And that was at a time when we said quarterback battles are dead. This is stupid. Why even have this discussion? And then Pavia turns out to be what he is. But that's just one to kind of keep an eye on of, are they going to favor the experience and understanding that you have Berlowitz coming in with all of these reps in that offense, and maybe it's going to be a little bit more obvious for him from the jump to be able to execute this offense and the concepts that Tim Beck would like to run, understanding all the pre-snap motion that they like to be able to do. Is he going to be that much further ahead from Jared Curtis? Or is it just going to be like, look, this kid's too talented. He can't stay on the bench. Let's just get him out there and he's going to take his lumps. We've got the job security. Let's figure it out.
Yeah, I think for that reason, right, they're similar, right, and they're different in that way. I would give Vandy's athletics team, their athletic program, credit for being kind of right on Tennessee's bumper in all the ways they care about, right? It's like, okay, well, Tennessee are now baseball fans. Vandy is right there. They care about basketball. Vandy is right there. And now football has started to kind of rise to that level. But that being said, that's still one is Tennessee and one is Vandy. Right? Having a 5-star at Tennessee is not the strangest thing in the world. Having a 5-star at Vandy, I think you were probably given some guarantees there that a Tennessee, especially following the Nico situation, isn't as willing to give. You know, you come play for Josh Heupel, you come play in front of that sold-out stadium, you're going to have to win the job, especially now, especially after Heupel has been accused of kind of sticking with his guys a little bit, Milton, Nico, those type of guys. So I think that is going to be an open battle, and it's one that's going to be really interesting. I don't know why are we still not Whit Muschamp here, man? For Vandy, you can't
never rule out a Muschamp. We'll have another Muschamp question that I'm going to get to, an unanswerable, specific to Muschamp question that we will get to in a minute here.
But yes, I am interested to see Curtis. It would be a lot easier for me to imagine him having that playing time at Vandy. But then at the same time, again, I think that Heupel has been kind of enigmatic, is the way I would say, in his two quarterbacks. So without seeing these guys in live reps, it's hard to tell where their heads are at as far as the coaches.
Well, here's what I wonder, and maybe this is an unanswerable question in itself. Do fans want to see a true freshman start week one? In their heart of hearts, I'm not talking about can they get excited for it. You better believe they can get excited for it. But do they truly want a true freshman starting quarterback in week one? Is that something that, if that news came out, and let's just say for whatever reason, one of these teams announced it in spring, which is not going to happen, but let's just say that happened, would that be well received or would it be poorly received, just from strictly the fan base standpoint?
I think fans are emotional creatures, and you've just banged this drum forever about modern recruiting as far as till the guy is playing meaningful reps and is good at football. Don't be too excited about it. But I think that part of the back of our heads as fans still says there's this complete version of this player that exists in my mind, and we're not going to win until we get there. Despite having a tendency that won as soon as Peyton Manning left, right? That our goal, all of our eggs as a fan should be put in the basket of getting the best possible quarterback, and whatever lumps we have to take on the way, we'd rather our guys struggle. Now, as a coach, you're going to think the exact opposite of that. You're going to think that taking those bumps might limit the ceiling of that quarterback. So I still think that, and we've just seen this with Lagway. We've just seen this with some other guys around the SEC, Arch Manning, where it goes, you got to have a prescription for the fans. Not even as much the player in a Manning situation, but to let them say, hey, here's the guy. You can see the guy. He's over there. He's real. He's not AI, because I think that that's ultimately how a coach, you look at how at the time Sarkisian managed that perfectly. And I think the Florida situation was a little bit more dynamic, we could say. And so whenever teams are losing, it's easy to say we were playing the wrong quarterback,
Yep. I think it's different to when it's from the jump. You can talk yourself into a lot of things. When Auburn makes this bold decision in 2019 to start Bo Nix from the jump. They make an announcement. They have all these stats for it, and it's a big deal. And it's the type of thing that obviously that fan base was going to be very fired up for, and they probably should have been, because he's a local guy. You already know, you hear on every broadcast about his dad. You know all of these things about him, and you get to begin this era of excitement from the jump. I think it's a totally different question asked at the college level as opposed to the NFL level. We talked about how quickly first-round quarterbacks play in this day and age. Very, very different. I think context is probably something that is lost a bit at times with that. Is what is it saying about the rest of that quarterback room if this guy is already beating out everyone? And also, you could tell yourself, well, if the coaching staff is already this sold on a guy, that's not going to be their natural decision to play a true freshman in this conference, knowing how big you need to be, knowing how many hits you're going to take in ways that you never have before. It's usually not the thing that they default to. But if a coaching staff is telling you, if Clark Lee makes the decision, hey, I think this kid is too good to have on the bench, he can make more throws and more plays for us, then I'm just going to default to that and kind of just take that stance. I think that's okay too. And maybe there isn't just that one specific reaction, but it's something to keep in mind, especially as these two specific battles play out.
I'll say really quick too, man. I think it goes down to two specific things, right? What does the player want, and is the team winning? Okay. Yeah. Because if the team's winning, you can say we're winning, shut up. Okay. If the player's happy, as in an Arch Manning situation, both of those things were going their way. Their team was winning, team was constantly advancing in the college football playoff, and the player had a plan. Well, if the player kind of leaks out via his camp, hey, we might be winning, but I'm not happy, then you got a decision on your hands. If you start losing, then you start to feel more pressure. We've seen that happen time and time again where guys get forced out. Even Anthony Richardson in Florida had that situation. So I think to me, I think it's that simple as far as even how fans view it. If you're undefeated, you can have no qualms with the coaching staff, I think.
Yeah. I guess I'm more so looking at week one and how that would be received. as opposed to, hey, we have to turn to this guy. Results dictate that stuff. But when you don't have results, because we have spring football.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Very different. Okay, and another unanswerable question here for you. Who will be the year one coach that makes their team unrecognizable from the year before? This is wild to think about, Will. The amount of transfers for each of these year one coaches, there are 6 of them in the SEC, is larger than I think the average fan realizes. This is so the average of incoming transfers that these 6 SEC teams have, the ones with new coaches, they have an average of 29 transfers. Wait a minute. That's not the average, Will. It's a minimum of 29 transfers. It is an average of 35. Think about that. There's 41% of your scholarship guys new, brand new. Bring them in. They weren't here a few months ago. They're here now. They're a big part of your team. And I think that as much as there is this sense of frustration that there is all of this fluidity with rosters in this day and age, one of the things that's totally different now as opposed to even 3 years ago is that if you want to implement your scheme, you're one of these coaches that you feel like the scheme is a big part of your identity, you should be able to do that in year one. I don't really want to hear the excuses as much. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to do it perfectly, but you pretty much have no choice to get in the portal and recruit to your personnel, because you're going to have a lot of guys that leave too. And you're going to have to kind of figure out what exactly that looks like. You're going to have a lot of these cliche things that you're going to hear in year one with these coaches who are trying to be the team that looks very different than the previous year. John Summerall talks about Florida having a weight room issue. I think he's talked about that with Andy Staples. I think JD Piquel, they brought that up as well. And look, I'm old enough to remember when Billy Napier told me, you, and everyone at SEC Media Days that Florida put on 400 pounds of muscle. So weight room issue? I don't know. I'm not willing to go there. Scott Frost, look, his team getting stronger every year. They were all bodybuilders by the time he was done. What's the first thing you hear Matt Rule talk about? Weight room issue, conditioning. Not there.
Connor, can I please talk about the Texas Tech weight room? Nothing has upset me more.
Adam Brenneman's video made the rounds. I saw this one. It did not have nearly the engagement that it had. And shout out Adam. Like, we've had Adam on the show a handful of times. But if you missed what exactly this was, Adam's doing a tour throughout the spring, and he gets to the Texas Tech weight room, and he finds out via a linebacker who looked just like Jacob Rodriguez. I was like, is that Jacob Rodriguez still there? No, it's not.
They're actually just cloning Jacob Rodriguez. That's their plan.
That's the Cody Campbell. That's the Cody Campbell money, is just clone Jacob Rodriguez. I don't blame him. I would look into it. But basically, they do not have weights that are less than 40 pounds. So you go off.
Which I've talked to my buddies that are in strength and conditioning, talked to my boy Peyton, talked to people kind of around the sport. And it's like, okay, that is the most beathead nonsensical thing, because the goal is to grow specific muscles, and some of those muscles are small. Sometimes you're going to do lat raises. Sometimes you're going to do skull crushers. Sometimes you're going to do things that you can't do with 40-pound weights. And so just to blanket say like, hey, that's like that I'll never drive a car, I only drive a truck. It's like those things never work out. So that was infuriating to me, as I really do respect Texas Tech to say that we're stronger than everybody because we don't go below 40 pounds. That's not how this works, son.
Maybe it is, though. What if it is?
What if they're way stronger than everyone? I'm willing to admit I was wrong. No one's ever tried this. So maybe they're going to have the new frontier. You're right.
What if Texas Tech is just set up to dominate the Big 12 for the rest of the 2020s, and they're the team that just doesn't allow a point in the fourth quarter? Then I think retroactively, whether you disagree with the policy or not, I think we have to go back and say, look, they were onto something. Once upon a time, people at Nebraska had to say that this lifting weights thing is actually good. It's not going to stunt your growth. And then Nebraska does what it does with Tom Osborne, and everybody starts lifting weights. So somebody's got to be out there, and credit Texas Tech for being there.
Someone's got to be first. Yeah, sorry. Back to transfers.
Yeah, what were we talking about again? So Florida doesn't have anything less than 30 pounds in the weight room right now. No, like you're going to hear all that stuff, and you're going to hear the cliche things that make you want to believe that a team is drastically different year to year. And look, I'd be selling that too. We've talked a lot about how John Summerall, it's almost like someone handed him a sheet and said, these are the things that Billy Napier did wrong and upset fans. Here's what you should say to make them not think that you were just Billy Napier 2.0 just because you were a group of 5 coach from the state of Louisiana. there are coaches that understand all of this, and part of it is indeed winning that battle. But here's what I mean, because everybody's going to come in and have their own changes, a lot of which are schematic, and the offensive scheme changes are going to be all over the place with those new coaches specifically. But 2021 Tennessee is the perfect example of this. Year one, Josh Heupel, he inherits a lost offensive team. I mean, I watched way too much of whatever Tennessee's COVID roster was in 2020 of them trying to have 6 different starting quarterbacks and whatever they called offensive football in 2020. It was not. It did not meet that threshold. And Josh Heupel comes in, and you're hearing receivers talk about all the different things that this offense is doing, how much more explosive it was, and guys that were there for the Pruitt years. And you're looking around going, all right, you can say that, and I could even see snippets of this in a spring game, and you could tell me how quick your possessions are and how differently you're going to operate. Until I actually see it out there, I'm not believing you. I'm not going to. And then you see it. And then you see what Josh Heupel does in year one at Tennessee, and an offense that in 2020 was lost and left for dead, that did not have the portal to be able to turn to instantly flip that personnel, still did a remarkable job year one, produced the number 7 offense in college football, and you saw a team that looked drastically different year to year, night and day difference. Like LSU suddenly becoming the best rushing attack in the SEC with Lane Kiffin. That would be an example of this. If Kentucky is suddenly this home run hitting team in the passing game that just all of a sudden, like, they're leading the SEC in 20-yard completions, you'd be like, all right, Will Stein did what he set out to be able to do. If Florida can actually score points in the second half, and if they're doing more than just adding 400 pounds of muscle in the spring, this will be a drastic change. That's what I mean when I talk about who is going to be the most different team among these year one coaches.
Yes, I fully agree. And I think what it does is it takes the power kind of away from the players and it puts it into the coaches, where they go, hey, if you got an established roster, like if you're Alabama right now, you're kind of trying to track down the couple of guys, like 10 or under guys, where it's like, hey, we're going to change your position. We're going to do this. Let's hope you don't transfer. Like we have a couple of key guys we need to get right. Whereas if you're bringing in, and I'm talking about all off season, right? Not even right now, just like, past the championship game. Okay, are you going to enter the portal? Whatever. When you're a new coach coming in, you're going, hey, the old guys, those promises they made, that doesn't matter. I have SEC scholarships for you right here. And in a world where we've devalued that and we said transfer every year, do everything you can, you become aware that there is a whole universe of individuals who understand that an SEC scholarship is like one of the most valuable things in the world. And you'd rather have guys that are bought into the system and that will do what is asked of them than guys that want to make it about them. And I think that totally changes the leverage for these like year one and year two coaches who have a little bit more carte blanche to say, hey, we've been given this mandate to change everything here. Just because you were part of the old way doesn't really mean anything, right? But I will say there is one caveat to this list here, that is Ole Miss. Ole Miss is bringing back a great starting quarterback and a great running back.
They still have 29 transfers. They still have 29 transfers coming in. So like you're still going to be having people question, how different are you year to year? And maybe you don't want to be different in a way that all of a sudden you're much worse, but like you still have people that are wondering, are you going to be able to replicate that offensive success? And does this feel very much like a new coaching staff?
Yes, and that's exactly where I'm coming from here, where you look at kind of all the other teams and it goes, what we had last year wasn't good enough. We're going to evaluate everything from the quarterback position all the way to offensive line, play caller. And then you look at Ole Miss, you go, we need to do 85% of what we did last year, and we're going to be just fine. If we have the best Ole Miss season in modern history, if we do 85% of that, we're so happy. And so I think that's one of the dynamics of Trinidad Chambliss probably will be in some meetings. Lacey will be in some situations because he lost his running back coach, right? So how they got to the spots that they got last year, some of that wisdom has been lost, but they just need to get back there. So I think Ole Miss is a unique situation, but that speaks to Portal Pete and his ability to add talent, which has always been there. And again, like Lane Kiffin got all the credit for it, but I think those guys are kind of 1 and 2 in the SEC.
Yeah, that's a good example. And you're right. Not everybody's in that same spot. Auburn's defense doesn't want to look drastically different than they did the year
That's
before.
A really good, because they brought their coordinator back. Yeah.
You bring back Durkin, you bring back a lot of key pieces on that unit. You'd like to replicate that success. That's the whole reason that Alex Kohler said, I'm not going to make an outside hire. DJ Durkin, you are my guy. Let's run it back. You still have a chance to look very different offensively, though. So I think it still does apply to Auburn, just maybe not in a wholesale way in the way that it does with some others. A question that we will not get an answer to until April, at least. Are we sure that post-spring transfers are a thing of the past. Something that I don't even know if coaches know the answer to this. I've seen JD Piquel talk about this a little bit. I'm sure others have as well. But if we are living in a time in which Charles Bediako is trying to play college basketball, I don't think we should rule out the possibility that we have disgruntled players who are trying to find new homes as walk-ons with some wink, wink, nudge, nudge deals. All right, you're going to see some teams that might try and push those limits. And I'm not saying that I expect former college players on NFL practice squads to necessarily like come back and do so in high profile ways. It wouldn't surprise me at this point. Maybe we're not going to have college players at the level of a DeMond Williams at Washington, where you're talking about whether or not he could walk on at a certain, LSU program. Like we're probably not going to have anything of that magnitude, but we could have these questions being asked. We really could. And we are probably going to only have a couple of these situations that this sort of thing can actually be like really get to court. Teams are getting involved, representation's getting involved, but it probably faces some potential hurdles if we get something that plays out like that. Because look, if you've got enforceable contracts that their new schools are being forced to cover, then chances are the roster holes aren't going to be drastic enough to want to cover that. You know what I mean? Like paying $1 million, they call it a buyout fee. It should be called a poach fee, to cover what it would be to lose that guy from your roster. Like, let's just say the Darian Mensah situation played out, except it played out after the spring, like this, the spring camp had concluded at these places. And all of a sudden Miami is just swooping in to be able to get him, and they're offering him like a walk-on spot at the university and not so much a walk-on spot at the team because he's just going to enroll at the university. Like, I don't know necessarily that we're going to have things like that are really high profile, but you could see how this sort of thing could play out at a time when everybody's just searching for these loopholes and how to find them. Like, what happens if a quarterback gets hurt and it's the starting quarterback? Will people try and find those creative solutions, like a redshirt freshman quarterback who thinks he won't start at one school? All of a sudden, this other school, they watch their starting quarterback roll an ankle, tear an ACL in spring camp, and they have an obvious need. And all of a sudden, we're wondering, are they going to be able to set something up? And they have a way to be able to clear it with the CSC. I don't know. Like, these things are questions that we probably need to be asking, because as much as I think that there is a sense of calm with having just the one portal window, I do think there is a little bit of that lingering concern of, oh wait, what if this happens? And what if someone has found a loophole that can be upheld in court?
Yes. And what's so interesting about that too, man, is that, okay, when the rules are always changing, you actually positively reinforce the guys that are pre-set up for the new rule set, i.e. guys that were kind of stretching the old rule set, right? So if you're an SEC coach, like obviously we have Shane Beamer on, right? I'm sure he would tell you, hey, if you follow the rules, right, you are getting penalized for some of these guys that are trying to read the tea leaves and do things that right now are a gray area, but in the future they might be legal, right? And I think that's what could be so frustrating as a coach, is that you want to do everything that you can to win, but where is that line about, okay, well, 5 years ago, where we're at now would have been completely unimaginable. And the coaches that saw it as the way that it was back then, they would be viewed as lazy today. And so much has had to change. And so I'll say it like that. Like, we really are incentivizing right now coaches to find, like the Charles Bediako situations that are a little bit weird. And especially if you have guys that are, if you're, like you said, if your quarterback goes down, if you're in last year, your deal, if you really need that and you don't have time to wait, it's almost like you're being incentivized really to find creative solutions around the NCAA rules. And I don't think that any real head coach worth his salt enjoys that part of the job at this point.
Yeah, no way. No way. You're told these are the rules. There's only one transfer portal window. Oh, by the way, just to be safe, because of the way that the college sports climate is unfolding and all these state courts that are essentially getting to be judge, jury, executioner with all these things, just in case, you don't want to leave it up to them. Why don't you just still kind of keep recruiting your own roster?
Just have like 3 guys out in Slovakia to see if their guys play in the Euro League that you can maybe go reach out to at one point. You know what I'm saying? Because you have to go have those guys out in Slovakia. You can't just go day one, get ready. So I really do feel for coaches in that way.
Yeah, I would not want to have to navigate that. Like, honestly, for the sake of for the sake of chaos. I hope this doesn't happen. But again, these are unanswerable questions that we're not going to truly know until we see this play out. Another question, Will. Is Will Muschamp's role as the head coach of the defense going to be a boost for Texas? It's going to be great seeing him out there running a defense again. Like I had to rewatch, the Bluegrass Miracle to kind of get that sense back, because I think if you've listened to me talk about Muschamp at any point in the last few months, I've had an eyebrow raise. And I still very much have an eyebrow raise when talking about him, because not since South Carolina 2020 has he run a defense with full autonomy. You can tell me he did great things at Georgia. I would say having Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann to be able to work with probably helps that at least a little bit. But Muschamp is a classic better suited to be a coordinator guy. Is he better suited to be a defensive coordinator than Pete Kwiatkowski, our guy PK? We'll see. We'll see. Time will tell. Sark certainly believes so. That's why he made this move. Part of the reason for him making this very bold move could have been that with all this turnover that Texas is going to be facing, they were going to have to rely on a lot of new starters either way. I think Texas is going to have 6 defensive players drafted. I think Anthony Hill Jr., I think Michael Taft, Malik Muhammad, Trey Moore, Jalen Gilbo, and then Ethan Burke is another one who he wasn't at the combine. I think he's going to end up getting drafted. The good news is that you have one of the most decorated returning players in the sport in Colin Simmons. He's going to be the key focal point on that defense. If you are going to have to all this turnover on the defensive side of the ball, and if you had to start over at any one spot, you want to start over with a game-wrecking edge rusher. That much is obvious. He is also now tasked with probably being the alpha of that defense, like Anthony Hill was, and we'll see if he can do that. I went through the depth chart on our lads and tried to find the amount of guys that the Texas defense brings back who started at least 5 games in a Texas uniform last year. That's just start at least 5 games. We're not even talking about like half the season. We're talking about starting 5 games, so more than a month. The list is Simmons, Jelani McDonald, and Grayson Littleton. That's it. 3 dudes. Now they added some veteran plug-and-play guys in the portal, and most notably Pitt transfer Rasheem Biles, not related to Simone. I checked. He's expected to do a lot of the same things that Anthony Hill Jr. did. That's really good to be able to bring in someone like that. He's one of the most prolific players that was available in the portal. But look, I'm still having questions about this unit, and it's not guaranteed to regress. It's not. Lord knows we're no longer in an era in which returning starters is the thing that we use as the right metric to project success. That's why I like to talk about percentage of returning production. Bill Connolly's still tweaking things with the transfer portal to kind of make that an even better, more sound metric. I imagine that's really difficult, but it is a wait and see unit, and it gives me at least enough pause to prevent myself from saying, yes, I think Texas is going to win a national championship.
So what are the we're cooked qualifiers here that you're looking for from Will Muschamp? Okay, because this is a big one. Is it a little bit of a lack of respect to the old defense? Is it a bit of a offenses are too complicated these days? You just got to hit somebody? Like, what are the types of things that you think could be disqualifying for Muschamp?
That's a great question, Will. Look, I'm not going to say, because he was out of it for 1 year. So it's not like he's coming in where he hasn't been working since South Carolina. And then he just comes in and crafts on modern offenses and says that people are overthinking defenses too much and look what I'm going to do and blah, blah, blah. No. What would probably be the red flag for me is if you hear him nonstop flexing about things that happened at least 15 plus years ago. How about that? If that's the only thing that we're hearing from Muschamp, we're talking like, I guess 2012 Florida. He probably still have the right to flex about that. That was an elite unit. That was a really, really good unit. But if we're hearing him probably go back to some of those LSU teams or even some of those Texas teams, like the first time I was here, we did this, this, and this. A little bit of a red flag. All right. Just in the same way that I hated hearing how Mike Norvell is hyping up Gus Malzahn as this great offensive coordinator hire for things that he did in 2010 with Cam. I'm like, buddy, a lot has happened on this earth since then. Okay. That is a long time ago. That is a lifetime ago. That would probably be the only thing. I don't know. Like, if he's on Ozempic, is that enough? I'm not saying Will Muschamp needs Ozempic. If we find out that he's on it and he's worried about his public image, is that a red flag? Probably.
I think, yeah, the image consultant, if he's on a Zipic, if he's not a Haas anymore. No, I'm with you. Reliving the glory days, I think is a red flag. And I will add, like I said, if he treats it like a rebuild, I think if he goes in there and immediately starts disrespecting, I mean, look at, Michael Taft, Anthony Hills Jr., some of the greatest defensive players and a very long list of great defensive players in Texas history, guys that I think fit right in, guys that have been in big games, guys that have won meaningful things in the SEC in the postseason. And so that being said, I think if he comes in and makes it seem like he's at Arkansas, and he's like, well, these guys just couldn't read cover 3 before this. Like I had so much ahead of me. I think if it's a disrespect to the previous admin, I think if it's looking back at his glory days, I think you hit that. And it was epic.
Yeah, and it was epic. Most importantly, I think that's probably the key. We are PK respecters. That those units were good. They were good. I know they fell off last year. They also dealt with some injury. Maybe dealing with some injury is actually going to be a blessing for this 2026 unit. You look at some of those guys that they're projected to start, and you're like, yeah, like this guy started 1 game. He got to start in the bowl game because they had all these opt-outs. Oh, this guy started 3 games. So yeah, I think that unit though is just going to be one of the more interesting groups in the SEC, and especially knowing that Muschamp is there to be able to run it. Speaking of that, Will, the most obvious weakness for potential SEC contenders, what is it? And which one of them will feel it the most? That is an unanswerable question in the spring. Just talked about Texas, the new look defense. Alabama, the run game. Georgia, wide receiver depth. Ole Miss, play callers. And I actually would say both sides of the ball because Pete Golding is still calling plays on the defense, but we've talked about it a lot in this day and age of college football. Can you be a defensive play caller? Can you be a play caller in general and still be a head coach? I think that's a legitimate question going in. Texas A&M, the passing game, LSU, short yardage, maybe not as much on defense. That's primarily an offensive thing, but I still do think that they do have some questions to be able to answer on that defensive line, year 1, Lane Kiffin. And then Oklahoma, the offensive consistency. Who are they going to be? Are they going to be the group that started off on a tear? Are they going to be reliable with John Mateer? And is this going to be an offensive line that can actually have a respectable SEC run game? I think those are kind of if I outline things that could be considered Achilles heels for contenders in the spring, things that they will probably have to address and talk about, and maybe they're going to sell this image, it's actually not a weakness. I think those will be the things that we're wondering about going into summer and probably going well into the season.
And how much of this do you think you can be sold on in the offseason?
Yeah. I don't know, because you're not going to watch a spring game and go, well, LSU's got the short yardage thing figured out. I don't think Lane Kiffin instantly gives you that ability to do that. When 2 years ago, the reason that they didn't go to the college football playoff with what was then the most talented roster Ole Miss has ever had, if they had a team that operated well in short yardage situations instead of just having to rely on JJ Pegues, I think it's a different story. Now, I don't think that we're going to have a true sense of whether or not Georgia's wide receiver depth is at an elite level. I will say I watched a lot of Isaiah Canyon this morning. I am buying more stock. I love me some Isaiah Canyon. I will be banging the drum for him. Future All Bang the Drum team member. But at the same time, we're going to maybe see one of these splash plays from one of their young receivers, and it's enough for a Georgia fan to kind of talk themselves out of it and be like, oh, hey, this isn't going to be an issue. Look at all these guys that are out here making plays. They're showcasing their abilities on the stage. We're not going to know. I don't think any of these questions are going to have truly defined things. Texas A&M might tweet out another video of Marcel Reed in shorts throwing a deep ball, and they might.
We're not going to fall for it last time. Just like I'm proud to say, I don't think we did the first time.
Yes, we very much called him out and said, no, we have reasons to call it this deep passing game. I think I've been very fair of Marcel Reed and his development as a passer. I think that's been confirmed with what you've seen on the field. But there's nothing I can possibly see in spring ball that's going to answer those key questions about contenders. And so what I would ask is this. The last 2 years, Georgia wins the SEC.
Hold on really quick. Let me hop in right here because I'm with you. I think that receiver depth I'm willing to listen to on Georgia. I think that they at least in the spring stuff, if you have guys that are just on the same page as the quarterback and the ball's not hitting them in the hands, you're kind of in a better job than you were the last couple of years with Carson Beck and then last year. One thing I'll say about LSU, and I am not willing to fall for listening to Lane Kiffin just straight out of his mouth yet. I think LSU still technically has a quarterback battle because I would say that the short yardage I feel great about. LSU quarterback health is what potentially cost them at least a spot last year, at least not being a laughing stock. I think that LSU quarterback health more so than their short yardage game, because I think Lane Kiffin will figure out short yardage. I think that between the new offensive line, the new running backs, they'll figure it out. But if they're being really protective, you know what I'm saying, with Levitt, if it's slow playing, if he's not ready, be prepared for a battle there, because Lane has shown that he will say one thing in the public and then do something else behind the scenes. So I think those two you can definitely keep an eye on.
Counterpoint: what if Landon Clark is just awesome?
That's kind of my take, is like, what if he comes out and balls out? We've already seen Lane Kiffin move off of his guy.
So then you're not worried about quarterback. So I'm not worried about quarterback. I it could look really different at different points of the season for LSU. But you're right. Quarterback health is, I think, a legitimate question with Sam Levitt. If you're going to maximize all the abilities that you think that this team can have in year one, him, like being able to be out there for a full fall practice with the ones, like full fall camp, I should say, that is an important box to be able to check that we're really not going to know coming out of spring, unless, of course, he aggravates it or does something to have that happen, in which case then yes, quarterback health is still going to be a question. But yeah, the short yardage thing, I think it's big. And I think it's big with the lack of separation with a lot of these SEC teams. And those are the types of things that are going to get magnified in this era of the conference. And I think it was magnified a couple of years ago for Ole Miss. I think it's something that was magnified for LSU a lot last year. Really, I mean, you could even argue it was magnified with Jaden Daniels. And I think that you could still probably make that case. It was an issue throughout the Brian Kelly era, despite the fact that we heard how great his offensive lines were going to be. So it's still something that, in my opinion, I go in with more question marks, and I need to kind of see that play out at least immediately before I think that's going to be a box that's obviously checked. So the question is, does it matter? Because Georgia wins the SEC the last 2 years with flaws, flaws that persisted into the postseason. And that could be true again. Maybe it'll even be true for the national champs. It could be. 7 SEC teams are in the top 14 of the DraftKings national title odds as of this recording, March 16th. Go figure that nobody right now is better than plus 700. I would have to go back and find when that's been the case, that nobody's been better than plus 700. By the way, Indiana, Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, those are the teams that are all at plus 700. I know everybody was wondering. But I do think that there is going to be a sense in August, and this isn't just within the SEC, but I think this is college football wide, of there is not a unanimous preseason number one, not anywhere close to that. Okay. And that's very rare, obviously, in the AP poll era, but more so this year than ever, perhaps. And even those 4 teams that I just listed, who are at plus 700 nationally to win it all, I think I could ask real legitimate questions, and they have potential Achilles heels that won't necessarily be addressed in spring ball, no matter how much they try and tell us that they are. So that's kind of where I'm at with all of this, is that it might not be a death sentence to have potential issues like these contenders do. And Lord knows they have other issues. Those were just, in my opinion, the most obvious ones that I think we can bring up today.
Yeah, man. And I would say too, like, I think those are the most glaring weaknesses. I think they individually cost each of these teams, at different points, right? Only, I guess LSU didn't make the postseason, fell very far short as far as their short yardage game.
They needed long yardage too.
They needed all kinds of things. Like they needed coaching, players, everything, right? New equipment staff, maybe. Anyway, so, but that being said, you go through this and it's like, yeah, Georgia was able to win the SEC 2 years in a row with these questions. But I think Georgia and Alabama are alone on an island of, if you win the SEC, that's not good enough. I think that at this point, with Georgia now having won the SEC and being one and done in the postseason, Kirby going, we'll figure it out. If we'll figure it out is we win the SEC and we get bounced again, that's a failure of a season. I think that Kalen DeBoer is in the same situation, where it goes, hey, if you make the title game but win it this time, we just talked about this in Adjustment More with Nick Saban, how just making the game, winning the game, it's nice when you're, Ole Miss, when you're A&M, when you're LSU right now. But if you've just been there, you need to succeed in the 12-team playoff, because that's what the new standard is. So I think that these questions need to be answered no matter what, because if we were coming off of a year where Georgia repeated or Alabama was dominant or Alabama was flawed but won, we could say, Just listen to the head coach. It'll be fine. He figured it out last year. I don't think any of these things got figured out. And I think they ultimately cost very good teams, except for LSU, the chances to really be contenders.
And I think if an issue persists for Texas going into the playoff, even if they win an SEC championship, which would be a great feat, it would be a really good feat, I think, for Steve Sarkisian. They're one of the teams that I think would benefit the most from a conference title, a team that came into a new conference and everybody was kind of going, hey, are you going to actually be able to do the things that you were able to do at times in the Big 12? And I think for Oklahoma, same sort of story, albeit, with a different sort of lead up with how well Oklahoma fared in the Big 12 throughout the 2010s. But those are two teams that you would look at and go, well, yeah, but this is still a legitimate accomplishment. And so, yes, you might have those questions going into the postseason, but that doesn't totally rule this out. Whereas, yes, it has become, I think, a little bit more hollow for Georgia to win an SEC championship. And I'm not saying that it means nothing. Kirby Smart will tell you it still means a lot. Alabama, I think Kalen DeBoer winning an SEC title would still matter, but that is ultimately not how his time in Tuscaloosa is going to be defined. Ole Miss, having not been there, yes, it would mean a whole lot. Of course, A&M, same sort of thing. Like, it would still matter, and those flaws would be a little bit more accepted if that were the case. But you're right. There are probably different degrees of that within those 7 contenders.
Yeah, so I'll just say really quick too, this is all new territory for us in that there is 0 head coaches. Obviously, Nick Saban is gone. Kirby Smart has been in these back-to-back situations where taking the coach's word for it just isn't good enough. And I think that's what's so fascinating is that there were fan bases who were able to say, okay, that's a problem for you, but we know we'll figure it out and we're not going to panic. There's going to be some panic across the SEC this year because nobody really has success to stand on right now in this modern college football.
Yeah, and maybe that's just probably the better way to look at it, is that you're not going to have the depth that you want to, across the board in this era of the sport. And there's just always going to be some holes. You can address holes, and that's good, but you're still going to go into fall camp feeling like there are some issues that our team could have and that we could run into, and we are not necessarily the juggernaut world beater, even if we are favored to win the conference, even if we are considered the favorites to win a national championship. So yeah, I think all of that context is perfectly fair. I am looking forward to getting to map out spring game schedule and what it's going to look like from a viewing experience. And yeah, maybe we'll overreact to some stuff. Let's do it. What does it look like with Cam Coleman and the new threats? Arch Manning throws them open in a spring game. Oh my God. Is that Cam Coleman? No, that's AJ Green out there. What are we talking about? Let's just do a lot of that. We deserve it because we didn't necessarily get to do that this past year and really the year before that as well.
That's the thing. Internally, we'll be keeping score of the deal breakers. Externally, let's just be hype gods. Let's just hype everybody up. Let's just share it all because who cares? It's OPM season.
Nate Frazier, I haven't seen a Georgia running back do that since Herschel. 1 jump cut. That's all I need. That's all I need. That's all we're asking for. All right, let's kick it to Shane Beamer. Great to catch up with Shane and be able to talk about this bounce back season that he hopes to be able to have. LaNorris Sellers coming back, kind of what that process was, and some new perspective heading into year 6 in Columbia. So here is Shane Beamer. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Shane Beamer. Shane, you got a lot to get to here, but you are suddenly tied for the 3rd longest tenured coach in the SEC, which is just a weird thing to say out loud. Does it feel like you're entering year 6, or is this kind of like where's the timeline for you? Does it feel like you're at that point at South Carolina?
Yeah, I saw that a couple weeks ago, and it was mind blowing. I mean, I think about the first SEC head coaches meeting I ever did was actually on Zoom because we weren't meeting in person yet because of COVID. And I remember just being on a Zoom with Nick Saban and Ed Ogeron and Jimbo Fisher and Brian Harsin and all these names from the 2021 season. And to be now in year 6, it's wild. So in some ways it does, in some ways it doesn't, if that makes sense. It's mind boggling that, there's 16 head coaches in the SEC and I'm the, 3rd or whatever, like you said. There's a lot of turnover that happens in this league. I knew that coming into it for sure, but in a lot of ways, it feels like right on schedule. It's been an awesome 5 years. Had a lot of fun. Had some ups, had some downs, but excited about where we are right now and going into year 6 and many more beyond that.
Last year didn't go as planned. Preseason number 13 to 4-8. And you could say, look, we don't care about preseason rankings. And you could say the record didn't tell the full story. You've been around the sport long enough to know this is still a results-based business, especially in the SEC. I'm not sure if it's just one thing for you. It probably isn't. But in hindsight, with that at your disposal, why do you believe last year unfolded the way that it did?
Yeah, I think, from an overall just roster standpoint, I probably didn't do a good enough job of replacing experience with experience. We lost a ton of seniors off that 2014. You look at all the impact guys, leaders that we had on defense, impact guys on offense that had played a lot of football, played a lot of college football, whether it be at South Carolina or somewhere else. And we lost a lot of maturity, experience, leadership off the 2014. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't oblivious to all the experience we were losing. I knew we needed to replace it, and we went out there to do that. And we brought in some guys. Don't get me wrong. Brandon Cisse came in as a transfer and played his butt off as a transfer. He was an older guy, brought experience, has a chance to be a first-round pick in the draft next month. But to me, the best teams in college football, the best teams in college athletics are the oldest, most experienced teams. So I think we lack some experience in certain areas, not the whole team, but we lacked a lot of experience in certain areas. We were very, very young. And because of that, we didn't play great in the fourth quarter. And that's what's probably most disappointing is we were, in my time here at Carolina, we've been a really good team in the fourth quarter. You look at a lot of the so-called great wins that we've had around here. A lot of those were wins and because we dominated the fourth quarter. From all seasons. And we were awful, just to be frank, in the fourth quarter last season. So as the head coach, I look back and say, okay, why weren't we good enough in the fourth quarter? I think we had like 7 one-score games that were 7 games that were 1 score or less going into the fourth quarter. And we just didn't play great. So I got to go back as the head coach, say, why did that happen? And be better in the fourth quarter. And a lot of that is the experience and the leadership that maybe we were lacking. And again, that's not making excuses. You're right. It's a bottom line business. And we were 4-8. We were nowhere near good enough. And it's my job as the head coach to be better. And I feel like we've always done a good job around here of when we get off track, we course correct and we get back on track and get back on course. And that's what we're hard at work trying to do.
Take me through the process of going out and getting Kendal Briles and knowing you were going to have a change to make, and that was going to be a pretty pivotal decision for you.
Yeah. Always tough making decisions when you're in a leadership position. You have to make tough decisions that negatively impact people you care about. And that's what happened last season, but it felt like it was the best decision for our program to make some changes on the offensive staff. And when I did that with 3 games left in our season. So because of that, it gave me a pretty big runway to figure out what the next step was going to be in regards to who I was going to hire to bring in as the offensive coordinator. I made Mike Furry the interim offensive coordinator. He did a great job calling plays against Texas A&M and then Coastal Carolina and Clemson. And all along during that time, one of those weeks was an off week when I made the decision to change offensive coordinators. So it really gave me the off week, open week to 1, do some recruiting, but 2, to kind of get my thoughts together in regards to what was next. And then the last 3 weeks of the season, and then once the regular season ended, I was able to spend a lot of time just talking to people, getting people's opinions on different coaches, watching offenses, studying offensive coordinators, and kind of figuring out what's the best next step for us. Talked to a lot of candidates outside of Kendal, talked to a lot of people directly, talked to a lot of people about a lot of people. And, in the end, just felt like when you look at a guy in Kendal Briles who, 1, has experience in this league from being at Arkansas, 2, wherever he's been, has always put together impactful offenses that could score points. He's been able to run the ball, throw the ball, both. Being able to talk to people that have played for him, guys like Rocket Sanders that played for him at Arkansas and different other people that had been around him, is everything came back positive. And I just felt like he was, what we were looking for in the next offensive coordinator. And he was interested in this position. And that's what excites me too, Connor, is, I said this before publicly, but you got a lot of there was a lot of attention on this position and a lot of excitement by people because of the fact that, they realized we didn't play great last season. LaNorris Sellers was a Heisman Trophy candidate going into the season. He didn't have the year that he wanted. So whoever comes into this position, it's a great opportunity, but there's going to be a lot of eyes on that offensive coordinator too. And I think there were some candidates that I talked to that early on, it was like, man, this is exciting. Heck yeah. And then as it got closer to, hey, this is getting real, I don't want to say shot away, but maybe the job got too big for him. Whereas Kendal all along was like, let's freaking go. And what an opportunity, chance to coach LaNorris Sellers, coach in the SEC, be at South Carolina. What a great fan base, high expectations. And he wanted to be a part of that, which fired me up too.
It's tricky because I'm sure, you have this thought of, well, I've got LaNorris maybe coming back at the time, but I've also got a responsibility to get the best person for my offense, not just for 2026, but long term. And you can't just make it who's the best coordinator for LaNorris Sellers. And at the same time, that's the thing that's number one on your list. How involved was he in that process? Because look, it's a new era of college football, and the freedom and the options that he had certainly was a part of his conversation at the end of the season. But like, were you finding that you had to be honest with him kind of at every step and be like, hey, these are the guys that we're kind of looking at? How are you feeling? Like, how did you approach all that with him?
Yeah, great question. He was involved. I wanted all of our quarterbacks to feel involved to whatever degree they wanted. I'm not naive. I realized that at that time, LaNorris had a decision to make. He could go to the NFL if he wanted to. He could transfer to another college if he wanted to. He had a lot of options to do, multiple things. So early on, it was, here's kind of what I'm looking for, LaNorris, in a coordinator. If there's guys that you're interested in, guys that you're intrigued by, like, send me their names. And he was awesome. I mean, he would watch a lot of tape and be like, hey, I just spent a lot of time watching, so-and-so. What do you think about him? And spent a lot of time or just finished watching so-and-so's offense. I like what they do. What do you know about him? Hey, I know this guy. He recruited me out of high school. You think he'd be interested? Not sure. There was a lot of give and take. And it was no different with, I want all of our players to be able to, have some input on some of that stuff. When I had to hire a new defensive ends, outside linebackers coach, Dylan Stewart and our other guys in that room, they were, hey, I wanted to communicate with them, kind of here's what I'm looking for and here's what I'm thinking too. And then in regards to LaNorris, it was good give and take back and forth. It wasn't like he gave me a list of names and I just went and interviewed those guys and said, here you go. Because you're right. You want to make sure you get the right guy for LaNorris, but also for the whole program going forward and the other quarterbacks. But it's kind of funny when LaNorris and I really hadn't talked a whole lot about Kendal, just, kind of briefly. And then I'll never forget, it was a Sunday and we were flying Kendal and his wife into Columbia to kind of come in on a Sunday night, meet with him quietly. Didn't want things to really get out out of respect for him and his job at TCU or what we were doing here, other candidates that I was interested in talking to. But, I felt pretty confident that if this visit with Kendal went well, that I was going to offer him the job. Otherwise, I wouldn't have him and his wife on a private plane flying into Columbia. And I was sitting at the airport waiting to pick up the plane when it landed. And LaNorris literally texted me and said, hey, the more I look at coordinators or the more I look at coaches and watch offenses, I'm really fired up about this coach Kendal Briles at TCU. And I remember thinking, well, that's a good sign because guess what, LaNorris, he's actually about to land. And I was going to call you here in about an hour to have you secretly meet with him to see if you guys kind of hit it off and stuff like that. So it ended up being well. And that relationship's been awesome between LaNorris and Kendal and all the quarterbacks since he got here.
You've been pretty open, I think, about, other schools and their attempts to poach LaNorris. And I'm sure you heard when Todd McShay said last year, Miami's going to make a real play for him. What is your perspective of watching that play out? And not just even, last year, but even after 2024, you've watched this play out. You've understood kind of the way that this new world of college football operates. And seeing look, this is a guy that had a lot of options on the table and he came back and ultimately he said, I'm running it back with you.
Yeah. I get it as part of it. I'll be honest with you. I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about where guys could go and what people on social media want to say you got a talented quarterback that has the physical tools that he has. Yeah, in today's time, everybody's going to be trying to poach those guys. We've got a lot of really talented football players on our football team outside of LaNorris, and there's a lot of schools that I'm sure are trying to get those guys to come play for them. That's part of it. For me, I really, truly just try and spend time on our team, coaching the guys that are here, developing relationships with them, and making this a place where guys don't want to leave because they know they can accomplish all their goals here on and off the field. They know they're going to be developed here on and off the field. They're going to have a great time doing it. And they're happy here, and they don't want to go anywhere. And not that we're perfect, because we certainly had some guys leave our program, but more often than not, we've got guys that really enjoy being a part of this program and don't want to go anywhere. And I think LaNorris certainly falls in that boat. He was happy here, is happy here, had a good quality of life, and more importantly, like, you can be happy and all that, but if you don't believe in the direction of the program and you don't believe that you can have success winning football games, you're probably not going to stay. But LaNorris or Dylan Stewart or Nicholas Harbor or Justin Okoronkwo at linebacker or Fred Johnson at linebacker or Gabriel Brownlow Dindy. I mean, we got a lot of really good football players on this team that could have gone other places, and they chose to stay here because, one, they're happy, but two, they believe in this place and what we're doing as a program, and then what we're doing for them individually. And that's what I put my efforts into is continuing to develop those relationships with guys and trying to advance this program forward each and every day.
There was a shot in the SEC doc on Netflix of LaNorris and his family at the steakhouse, and I'm blanking on the name of the steakhouse in Columbia that it was at.
Oh,
that's right. That's right.
Oh.
His dad is like sitting down doing like surf and turf, and he's like got a mouthful of steak. He's like, "This is the best decision you could have ever made, man." And it's like, yeah, look, his family's been taken care of, and to understand like where he was at as a recruit, I think it's different with his situation as opposed to some of these other guys that have come through. And roster retention is certainly important. It's the name of the game in this day and age. Nick Harbor's another one of those guys that a lot of people are kind of like looking at and going, "Hey, is he going to be part of this bounce back season that you guys hope to be able to have?" How should we in the media talk about Nick Harbor? Because I feel like every time I see a take about him, it's wrong.
Great point. I think you should talk about him in that he's a unbelievably physically gifted guy. God blessed him with a lot of physical tools. When you talk about being 6'5", 240 pounds, and you're a world-class track athlete, like there's very, very few guys like that in the world. You should talk about him that he is a great, great, great young man, and did not ask for all these outside expectations from the outside world on him. Did not ask to be named one of the freaks or the number one freak in college football. Didn't ask for all these expectations from the outside to be on him. Came in here, realized that he had a long way to go, and has done nothing but just put his head down and work. And it's pretty cool to see how he's developed from his true freshman year of 2023 to where he is right now. Just that's what I would hope you guys would talk about in the media. It's just great kid, physically gifted, but has just put his head down and worked and gotten better as a receiver every single year. And it's pretty cool to see him have the success that he's having, whether it be the long touchdown catch he had against Clemson last year, or being able to take basically a little 12-yard curl route against A&M and outrun their entire defense to the end zone. It's exciting to see him be able to take the next step now as a player. But, that's what I appreciate about him, Nick. It's just his humility and his work ethic. And no matter how much the pressure on the outside, how high it may be, he just wants to be a good teammate, good person, and just work really, really hard to be the best player he can be.
If I gave you the option of going to the dentist every day for a year, or having to discuss offensive line injuries up until the season, which option were you choosing?
Probably the dentist every year. Although I got a dentist appointment this week, so I'll touch base with you afterwards and let you know. But no, that's not much fun. Neither one of them are.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And if those conversations are happening in October, different story. You'd rather have them now than October. That is
No
the good
doubt.
news.
No, it's part of it. It's unfortunate. Like I said, the one with Jay Peak, that was unfortunate to say the least. And then the one with Josiah, that's something that, wasn't anything, I guess in the news it was new, but that wasn't anything new for us. That was something that we'd known since, December, early January. But obviously timing of any injury is not ideal, particularly on the offensive line where we're very thin to say the least right now from a depth standpoint. But we've got a lot of capable guys, and both those guys are working really, really hard to get back.
How do you manage that, knowing that's going to be an area that everybody's looking at and you're like, hey, look, depth, you mentioned it. Depth is a question mark. Like, how do you manage that, knowing that the margin for error is going to be really slim, but at the same time, it's not that you need all world offensive line play. You've got a guy that can overcome a lot of that.
Right.
How do you have those conversations in critically evaluating that position, knowing that all eyes are going to be on that?
Yeah, I think for one, that you go back to the end of the season, we knew that we needed to get better on the offensive line. This is before injuries even happened. And then we did that. We signed 3 really, really talented offensive linemen, 2 of which are here right now. And Darius Gray is coming in the summertime. So excited about those guys. We went out and we were, we said priority number 1 in the portal is the offensive line. And, people want to act like that Peak is the only offensive lineman we went out and signed, and he's hurt and now we're screwed. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, we went out and signed a lot of offensive linemen that have a lot of production in their careers before they got to South Carolina, which we're fired up about those guys and the way they've gotten better since they got here into our program. And then we've also got some guys that we bring back that are really talented players. Nolan Hay was a guy that we brought in the transfer portal last year that was, got hurt in the first or the third game of the year as a starter against Missouri and didn't really play much the rest of the season, if at all. Shed Surratt came in last year, started as a true freshman. Marquis Anderson's a guy that's been around. So are our numbers where we want them to be depth-wise? No, but I can't imagine a lot of schools in the country say that they are their numbers. So how we manage it, we continue to coach the guys that are healthy, keep getting them better, get these other guys, these young guys and these new guys ready to play as quickly as possible. And then certainly it all starts with having good quarterback play, but it's not just the 5 offensive linemen. There's different things that we all got to be better. Me, coaches, tight ends, running backs, receivers, quarterbacks, and the offensive line. We all got a hand in there in how this offense rolls.
I imagine that seeing Nick Eamon shine like that in the NFL had to just bring a certain sense of pride for you, especially watching NFL people kind of discover him after there were questions like, oh, he tore up the combine. He's unbelievable. But is he a tweener? Is he going to go to the right place? And then you just get to see him star for a team that wins the Super Bowl. What's that like as a head coach, knowing, hey, this guy that you got to watch develop from a freshman, literally a guy you had out there as a true freshman, a guy that when he got taken off the field, there were people like Todd Monken that would just go and attack that specific area and know like this guy is a different type of player. Being able to see him kind of shine on that NFL stage, what's that like as a head coach?
Yeah, it was really cool. I'm happy for him, and just so cool because he's not your typical story. Everybody, he came out last year in the draft. Everybody was comparing him and it was Malachi Starks from Georgia, and both of them are phenomenal players. But you look at Malachi's story; he was Mr. 5-star. Everybody in America wanted him, and rightfully so. Went to Georgia, had an unbelievable career, and he's going to have a great career as a pro. You look at Nick. Nick was not Mr. 5-star; he was Mr. 3-star. That's just local kid here in Columbia, South Carolina, that came to our summer football camp with. I think maybe Wake Forest was his only offer at the time, I think. But this is before his senior year. We had him in camp, and we were like, holy smokes. But you saw the physical tools. You weren't really sure what he was going to be. Linebacker, defensive back, we didn't know. But then to be able to see him come into your program, he gets thrown into the fire the very first game of his college career. He's starting by game 2 against Rocket Sanders and KJ Jefferson at Arkansas. He played well in that game, and then just to see the way that he just continued to grow and get better as a player during his 3 years here, then see what he did at the combine, then to see what he did in the NFL. It's great that the whole world got to see that. You know, it wasn't necessarily a surprise for us because, one, I know how physically gifted he is, but probably his greatest quality is just how competitive he is. I mean, people still talk about 2 years ago, we were having a team wiffle ball tournament in our indoor facility, and he's playing center field, and he looked like Ken Griffey Jr. out there, like somebody hit a wiffle ball to deep center, and he takes off on a running start and literally like dives and is parallel to the ground and makes this catch in the outfield in, I don't want to say a meaningless wiffle ball game because it had a lot of meaning, bragging rights and a trophy and hats to the winner. But to see him like compete and sell out on that, like that's who he is. And that's his greatest quality, in my opinion.
Shane, this has been great. I want to get you out of here with some rapid fire. Just 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind. Does that work for you?
Yep.
All right. First one. When do you sweat more? When you're doing your early morning rucking or a noon kickoff at Willie B?
Noon kickoff.
Yeah. 2, you get to be college football commissioner. Give me the first immediate change that you're making.
One-time transfer. And after that, you got to sit out a year.
Yeah, that's fair. What is your go-to entertainment on a flight?
Reading, or if I don't have something to read, a movie that I've probably downloaded, but reading.
Okay. Reading is something that if I have to do that on a plane, I'm like, just take me off this plane. Like, no, can't do it. What's your electric chair meal?
Ooh, great question. My wife makes chicken spaghetti, which is kind of a hit in our household. So chicken spaghetti, some bread. I wouldn't be too picky. I mean, it's the electric chair meal. I'm going to have other things on my mind probably than what I'm eating, but I'd probably go with that. Sentimental reasons, and it's good.
That's the right answer because you started it with my wife makes. That's smart. Last one for you. You get asked about your dad all the time. Best recent piece of advice from your mom, Cheryl, and it doesn't have to be football related.
Ooh, I don't know if it's so much advice. My parents are actually moving out of their house in Virginia, and I'm a pack rat. I save everything, and she literally came to Columbia and brought like 6 boxes of just stuff that I had saved going back to when I was in high school, like every newspaper article about Virginia Tech football, every game program. So it wasn't so much advice as it was a directive. Like it was essentially, to paraphrase, I'm not keeping this crap. Like if you want it, here it is, go through it. And if you don't want it, throw it away. So that was very much her just probably giving me some advice. Don't save everything. Like, do you really need this newspaper article from 1994 that you save? But it was pretty cool being able to go back through and look at a bunch of stuff from the past too.
Yeah, that is just get rid of stuff. Just if you want to get rid of stuff, it is just good advice, no matter where. Yeah, Shane, really appreciate the time. Best of luck this season.
Yep, thank you. Hope to see you soon.
All right, well, let's close with some lad of the week. You have a totally unbiased selection for lad of the week.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, in the fact that I'm an American patriot, yes, I love Paul Skeets, and I think that he did a great job in service to his country. I was just joking with you that like Rosenthal was interviewing him about like, oh, what does this mean for American service members? And I was like, oh, this guy's life very nearly went a different direction. He was very nearly just in the Air Force, and then he realized that he was the hardest thrower of the baseball, potentially since Randy Johnson or ever, maybe. And it was really cool watching the World Baseball Classic, albeit ending in kind of an interesting way last night, getting to see some of our favorite MLB stars. I think that baseball should certainly lean into kind of the pomp and circumstance and the vibes of the World Baseball Classic. It's so easy when you see something like that to go, oh, wow, we could just bring this at home. So, you know, on the hot seat are the unwritten rules of baseball. But yeah, I think that, you know, given how the week started with the loss to Italy, did you see the thing about the manager of Team USA not knowing that they clinched?
Mark DeRosa is a former Cub. I love D-Row. I love D-Row as a player. There was a long time in my life in which he provided one of the best Cubs playoff moments. He had a home run. I think it was game 1, 2008 NLDS to get a very early lead against the Dodgers, and the Cubs like never led again in the series. I cringed so much watching that about like him not knowing that the U.S. hadn't qualified for the quarterfinal and that they had like rested specific guys thinking that they had already qualified. Could have been an all-time blunder. could have been an all-time blunder. And thank you, Italy, for bailing out the U.S.
Yes, and famous Italian Aaron Nola, of course, who I
Right.
learned was from Nola, Italy, which made me laugh so hard. Like his family, like mind you, generations ago. One of my favorite things is to go through the Italian team and see where they were born and be like, this guy's from Secaucus. But anyway, so I just love the World Baseball Classic. I can't get enough of it. But like I said, after the manager basically was wrong about the tiebreakers and who clinched, Team USA was set up to really just puke on their shoes. And again, Paul Skeens is just the guy who keeps breaking every curse. Famous girlfriend curse. Team USA manager curse. There was the video of the dude from like SEAL Team 6 talking about the details of taking out Osama bin Laden, and like that video went viral. So everything was on Team USA to just be embarrassed on the world stage. And Paul Skeens went out and dealt almost 5 innings of basically 1-run ball, and he was like able to keep a very, very strong Dominican team that has been better than America internationally, kind of for a minute here, to limit their offense and keep it close. So yeah, it was a great moment. Team USA sports are like the best they've ever been right now. It's pretty cool to watch.
Except for soccer. Yeah.
Well, that's never going to happen. So once you appreciate that, like after kind of our golden generation fell on their faces, I went, I don't have to care about this anymore. And now I'm happy.
World Baseball Classic looks like a lot of fun. I admittedly have not watched World Baseball Classic, any of the coverage just yet. I've seen all like the storylines and I've seen a lot of clips and stuff. One of my high school baseball teammates played for Team Israel 4 years ago. Was it 4 years ago or 8 years ago? I don't remember when it was. And it looks like an incredible experience. And it looks like a lot of fun. Crowd's really, really into it. And different than the Olympics, but still like one of those things that when it's right, it seems like it'd just be an elite atmosphere. So I'm going to have to tune in, obviously, if they're getting to the championship. Admittedly, bandwagon fan, World Baseball Classic, Team USA, but seeing Paul Skeens in the clips, man, you're just like, has anybody touched this guy ever? Ever? I have no idea. Couldn't tell you. All right. I got John Calipari. Let's go there. Let's go there. I had a tweet that Kentucky fans slightly misinterpreted, just a little bit. And John Calipari obviously wins the SEC tournament with Arkansas. Darius Acuff, pretty good. Confirmed pretty good. So the tweet was, Cal having both a Sweet 16 trip and an SEC tournament title before the end of year 2 at Arkansas is enough to make Kentucky fans throw up in their mouths a considerable amount. My point was not to say Kentucky fans, you should want him back. That was not my point. That thing had run its course. Okay. And I know this, like I talk about this all the time. Like my brother and sister-in-law live in Lexington. She grew up diehard UK fan. Her mom is the biggest UK fan I've ever seen before. Like they live and bleed it all the time. All right. So like I get a lot of different Kentucky basketball takes, even when I don't even necessarily ask for them. So like I've like understood the dynamics of this for a while. Okay. And I will not sit here and tell you Kentucky should have never let him go to Arkansas. That was not my point of that. My point was to say that Kentucky fans had no reason whatsoever to root for Cal when he left for Arkansas. None. And seeing him having another win as a head coach in the conference was not going to be something that they got behind. Okay. And him having all of a sudden maybe the best player in college basketball and Darius Acuff and up there. Okay. At least up there. He's part of the conversation. He is part of this conversation going into March. And I think he's got a team right now that nobody wants to see in a single elimination tournament. And the fact that it's occurring while Kentucky has very much an identity crisis in basketball with Mark Pope, wherein you don't know what you're going to get game to game. Yeah, that probably has to be nauseating for that fan base. You have to win the breakup if you're Kentucky. The whole point of this was to win the breakup. And Cal is currently winning the breakup, even though, look, I get it. Kentucky, you went to the Sweet 16 last year. You went just as far as Cal did. You could say, what has he actually accomplished? I fully get that. But right now, the conversations that he is in and that he is a part of is different than any sort of button that Kentucky fans would have pushed when he signed the dotted line to be the next head coach of Arkansas. Okay. If they could have pushed a button that said, oh, Arkansas is a non-factor through 2 years under Cal, and this looks like a move that never made sense, and he's just kind of over the hill and the game has passed him by and he doesn't understand modern basketball. If they could have pushed that button, they would have pushed it. But instead, this scenario is playing out. Kentucky fans will say they don't think about Cal, whatever. It's a new era. It's a new time. That's fine. You're allowed to say that. but you had to watch him win a tournament that used to be Kentucky's to lose. And it was Kentucky's to lose with him. And part of that has to suck. And it's okay if that sucks. And it's okay to throw up in your mouth a considerable amount.
I have a lot of good friends that are Kentucky fans. I told you that I grew up kind of being a bandwagon Kentucky basketball fan because a couple of good family friends of ours kind of got me into it young. I'm still friends with some of their family, and Drew Page is a big Kentucky fan. So I say this from this place. I always used to say John Calipari is like the Les Miles of college basketball, and they hire Mark Pope, and I go, well, this is easy. There's your Coach O. We'll see where this takes you. We'll see how long it lasts. I didn't factor into that comp how much talent truly matters in this sport. And that how Calipari can be a step slow as a schematic coach while still bringing in great talent, and how that could be all you really need in the sport. And so I think that was almost too disrespectful from my end to Cal and what he's done. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not, breaking news or anything to say this is not the standard that Kentucky expects. And I think that greener pastures are ahead. And I mean, it will be with a new athletic director, which I think they would tell you is probably just fine with them. And the football team is looking pretty exciting. So I think that greener pastures are for sure ahead.
Yeah, I just think the notion of like, oh, we don't care about Cal at all anymore. No, that's not how this works. Like you did not expect him to be doing what he's doing in Arkansas. And you can admit that. There's no way that you would have said, oh, through year two, like these heading into the NCAA tournament in year two, this is how we're going to be talking about his program. And like, that's fine. And instead, I've got all these Kentucky fans that are just telling me nonstop, oh, I don't understand that dynamic at all. I don't understand that it runs course. No, I get that. Okay. I'm not saying that he would have done this at Kentucky, but he showed no signs of late life at Kentucky and lost inexplicably with teams that were so talented. And so now when you're having to watch him do this, and meanwhile, and Kentucky fans know this very well, when you have the most expensive roster in the sport and it's underperforming and it's totally inconsistent, that sucks. And that just sucks to have to deal with. So yeah, but Cal, seeing him celebrate the SEC tournament championship and some of the reactions that he had, you're like, all right, this guy who a lot of people think a lot of different things about him, he's having a moment right now, and he's certainly savoring this. And if he goes on a deep run to the Elite Eight, it's one of the bigger sports stories of this year, at least in terms of college sports and college athletics. And seeing him do it with a guy that is very much becoming a household name, a guy that's getting compared to the great Cal freshmen, Anthony Davis, Derrick Rose, and these guys, just think it's worth mentioning. So
absolutely, the old guy's got a couple more years in him, we'll say.
That's what we always say. March Madness, it is here. I'm sure that people will be locked into that. We will be locked into an episode of It Just Meant More. Again, I promise we will be. Per Jordan Hare, that's not 100% totally official. Should we just make it official right now, Will?
Let's do it, man.
Let's do it. All right. Looking forward to that. That will be coming out on Friday. So please, please, please subscribe if you are not already subscribed. Email us. We'd love to be able to get your emails about where you were for some of these games, or if you have some unique story, please email us, theogkickoff@gmail.com. Please leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the OG Kickoff. Follow us on Twitter @CJ O'Gara. Echoes are hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.